Okay, this week we're talking about water movement as well as minerals into plants. So the way water moves into plants is through osmosis, and that's the diffusion of water, and it's the diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane. In this case, it's going to be a cell membrane. And the membrane allows a passage of only certain substances, and that's selected on the basis and size and usefulness of the molecules. And for this purpose, we're going to be talking about water. So what controls osmosis is the unequal distribution of particles called a concentration gradient. And you can see on the left-hand side, this is what it looks like before osmosis. So there's a concentration gradient on the right-hand side of this particular graphic. And so what happens is, in order to create homeostasis, the water will move into that other side to balance out the concentration gradient between the sides. So most cells, whether they're multicellular or unicellular, are subject to osmosis because they're surrounded by water solutions. So what materials are transported in plants? Of course, water, carbon dioxide, minerals, carbohydrates produced in photosynthesis, and plant growth regulators. So on the left-hand side, we've got a turgid cell. That's a cell that is full of water, and the water has entered by osmosis. The vacuole swells and pushes against the cell wall. On the right, you've got the water has been lost from the cell, and the vacuole will shrink, the cells will lose shape, and especially in plants that are very herbaceous, you're going to see a complete wilt of the plant. And here's another picture of that. There's the turgid cell from a leaf that has enough water. And then on the right, you see that there's flaccid cells that have no water. And so the plant can't stand up. So another thing you get into with water being taken up is edema, which you often will see on geraniums. It looks like a little disease, but it's not. The roots are taken up through the water faster than it can be used by the plant and transpired through the leaves. So water pressure builds up in the internal cells of the leaves, causes them to burst, and then the dead cells appear as blisters. So salinity can also affect water uptake. So high soluble salt levels in the soil can cause plant drought stress, and these soluble salt levels are usually attributed to a lot of fertilizer. So the water in the soil is drawn away from the plant roots to the high soluble salt areas of the soil, and without access to the water, plants dehydrate, and then you'll have the stems wilt and roots can burn to the point of no recovery. So plant roots will absorb some of the excess salts in the soil, including salts from over-fertilization. And if the plant does not use and metabolize this excess salt, it will be taken up. It will reach toxic amounts in the plants. And the most common symptom of this is salt stress in plants, and you're going to see brown edges on older leaves. Now, just because you may see this, it may not be that. You need to know the story of the plant, and we'll cover that when we get into plant pests in the spring. We'll talk about some of it in soils next quarter. So here's a plant that actually, it's a geranium, and it also looks like it's got some edema, but you can see the salt damage on the margins here. Here's a strawberry with some salt damage. So with water uptake, your root epidermal cells absorb the water by osmosis, and the way that roots adapt for this absorption is that root hairs have large surface area, they have thin walls, they don't have a waxy cuticle, and the cell sap has a lower water concentration than the soil water, so the water is able to come in to create that equilibrium on either side of that root. Root pressure is when water is drawn into the roots by osmosis. The extra volume causes pressure to build up. This pressure pushes water up through the xylem. Water moves from the epidermal cells across the ground tissue of the cortex and into the xylem vessels. And here's just kind of a cross section of a root. Here's the water moving in by osmosis and into the xylem. Sometimes what happens is guttation, so that when the root pressure is very high, it can force water up through the leaves of small plants, and then they're going to exit through structures at the end of the leaves called hydatodes, which are at the ends of the leaf veins. So there's two mechanisms that combine to move water through the stem in the xylem. One is root pressure that we just talked about, and the other is transpiration. They form a continuous hollow pipeline from the roots to the leaves. So transpiration is the loss of water vapor from the plant. As the water evaporates from the leaf, more water is pulled upward through the xylem into the leaf, and this is called capillary action. So capillary action is a tendency of water to move against gravity along a narrow tube. And I like to explain that like it's like a straw, you know, that it's being pulled up like a straw. Okay, there's our root hair, there's the ground tissue, and the xylem in the middle, and the water comes in through the root hair, through root pressure, and moves into the xylem. Okay, so transpiration, as I mentioned, is the loss of water vapor through open leaf stomata. And again, there's got to be a balance on either side of water vapor content. The gradient has to be equal. So how does it work? On sunny, warm days, the sun warms up the leaf surfaces and the water in the cells of a leaf begin to evaporate. So the water vapor collects in the spongy mesophyll tissue of the leaf. The water vapor moves out of that spongy mesophyll through the open stomata and into the drier air surrounding the leaf. As water evaporates from the spongy mesophyll, new water molecules are delivered to the leaf through the xylem in leaf veins. And here's another picture of the leaf with the water vapor leaving, and just a graphic of the water coming up through the roots, through the xylem, and out through the leaves. So the stomata can protect from H2O loss if it closes. It can also be responsible for bringing in CO2. So opening and closing the stomata is dependent on the turgor pressure of the guard cells, and that's a thick inner cell layer. It causes bowing of the cell when turgid and opens the stomata. Okay, so what determines rate of transpiration? Well, if there's low humidity, that will increase transpiration because you still want to have that, water vapor on the outside compared to water in the leaf. Temperature, it's obviously going to be a higher transpiration rate on hot days than on cooler, cloudy days. With wind, the rate of transpiration is greater on windy days than calmer days. And light intensity, which of course that's involved with photosynthesis, and we will be talking about that very soon, stimulates the stomata opening. So the rate of transpiration is also affected by leaf shape, size, stomata, and waxiness of leaf surfaces. And conifer needles are actually more efficient at retaining moisture than broadleaf trees. They have stiff, waxy needles, they have small stomata, and those are recessed on the leaf surface. And only 1% of all the water a plant absorbs is used in photosynthesis. The rest of it is lost through transpiration. And, Loss is I'm not sure I like that word, it's just part of the water cycle. But it's good to know that a large oak tree can transpire 40,000 gallons per summer or 79 gallons per day.